Greetings, this is Jared Love, and in this video I'll be going over 4D modeling, which is a term I predominantly use when relating to blend shapes. And it's a term that you can kind of use for all rigging in general, but the premise behind this idea is with modeling, you're three-dimensionally modeling. So you have, for any given vertex, you've got an XYZ position, that's your 3 dimensions. But with 4-dimensional modeling, which is what riggers will tend to do, you're concerned with that end result of the 3 dimensions, but you're also concerned with how it gets to that new position from its original position. So the 4th dimension is basically what happens as you get to that 3D point through time or just through motion. So in this case, I have pretty simple things set up here. I've got a base shape and a target, and I've created a blend shape between them. I've got this control. The translate Y is just directly driving that target attribute. So the first tip for creating better 4-dimensional blend shape targets would be to consider the fall off of your shape. And now to help illustrate that, I'm going to use this cluster. And it could be, how you would paint weights on anything. You've got a deformation happening, and you see these kind of jaggies happening in your shape. So the way you would go about it to adjust it and clean it up is to obviously clean up your weighting. And so you may take it really far, like something like this. So this is going up, around 4, and then you would adjust your weight. So you may, add a little bit of weight here, maybe add some there. Use your smoothing to smooth it down, get something to behave a little nicer. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you get the idea. You're adjusting your weights by painting and adding, or you could even add with the negative to pull some. Oh, min value is, let's try -1 there. So now we can do a negative, and then you can add some negative value in there to kind of knock it back down a little bit if you need to. So say that's looking great, and that's exactly what I wanted it to look like. So now when I grab this cluster, and instead of going to 4, if I go to 1 or close to it, I've got a much cleaner shape there. There's closer to my 1 value. So this is a cleaner shape, and it's not really changing the deformation all that much. You're just trying to get it to have a cleaner fall off, So you've got your epicenter, and it just kind of falls off kind of more cleanly from that center. So you can apply the same kind of idea with blend shape targets. So in this case, I'll put this to 1. This is a similar shape, and it's nothing fancy, like all my examples. It's just a mound here. I'm just trying to help illustrate the point. So, on this side, I've got these kind of jaggies going on. On this side, you can sort of just barely see it. This is kind of really flat, and I would like it to have a smoother shape. And then this side, I've got this going up higher than this side. And I'm really just focusing on these bottom 2 rows here on these. But you may come into a situation where you don't necessarily notice it. It won't necessarily be this bad and obvious, but you could have a situation where at your 1 value for your blend shape target, it may look okay, and that's great, but generally animators like to push things further. So as a general rule, I will at least push it to 2 to see how it looks. And kind of here you can start to see it very much more clearly that this is not really working all that well, and it has a kind of a funky shape to it. And this, of course, is just becoming even worse of a problem. So what I'll tend to do is, like I said, I'll push it to 2, but in this case, I'm just going to push it to 4. So you can really kind of see some issues here, and it makes it a lot easier to notice. Now, one thing you could do is you could go get on your target here and you could grab the actual individual vertices and move them around to kind of help clean it up. And you can do that. It's just a little difficult because you're grabbing points over here, you're looking at points over here, and you're moving over here. You're not really right on top of it over here. And another thing is, like, since this target is set to 4, looking at this, so it's at 4. This is going 4 times as fast as this vertex when you move it around. So it's kind of tough to get it to work out. And if you're working in XYZ instead of just one axis, it's a complete nightmare. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but I don't wish that on my enemies. So what I like to do is I will actually duplicate this off. So I've set it to 4, and then I take that duplicate and let's move this over here. So now you can take this guy and you can clean it up. So with this, you're getting exactly what you want it to look like at 4. And you can get it to be pretty nice and clean. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time working on this because I'm just kind of trying to illustrate a point here. But you may want to kind of average these a little bit and pull this guy down some to get a nicer shape. Maybe this guy needs to come up some more because he's staying a little too flat. Kind of same here, and maybe these guys need to. So, okay, so let's say that's beautiful, that's great, and that's what you want. So that at 4, it's going to look more like this. Now the problem comes in when you're like, okay, well, that's great and all, but how do I apply this back onto my target? I don't want to make another target or an in-between. I want it to actually clean up all the way through from 0 to 4. So one thing I do with anything that I'm creating blend shapes for is I will have a clean base shape. Now what I mean by that is you have your base shape and you duplicate it off in its undeformed state. So there is no deformers on this, and you duplicate it off, and that is now your clean shape. It has 0 deformers. It's essentially the same as if you just imported the model again and used that as your base shape. Sorry, used it as your clean shape. So what I'll use this for is if I'm creating targets, I may have pulled some stuff too far, so I'll blend shape this back onto it and paint blend shape weights to kind of back off some deformation and push it back closer to its original state so that I can very easily negate out some of that deformation that I put into it. But in this case, what I'm going to do is, let me put this back up to 4. I'm going to use this as the target shape, and this is the base shape. And then I will create that blend shape. So now if I push this to 1, it goes back to the flat square again, which you would expect it to do. So the question then comes, how do I get this back onto, how do I know what value to put onto here? So there's a pretty simple little equation. You take 1 and you divide it by the value that you pushed it to, so in this case 4, so that's 0.25, and then you subtract that from 1, so it's 1 minus 0.25, which is going to be 0.75. And now if we put this guy over here, all right, now you'll see the 2 shapes line up dead on right here at the top. These were points I didn't move. And you'll see just a very little bit of difference between the 2 here. And that's where I modified it. So just quickly, here's that equation. If you were to do 2, then obviously 0.5 would be the value you set. I tend to stay away from doing it to 3 because it's 0.6 repeating, so it's hard to set that value exactly. But most other values give you a nice clean value to use, so 0.8, 0.75. So like I said, I'll typically do 2 or 4, and those will be the values that I actually use. when I'm pushing these targets further to kind of adjust and see how they go. So now that you've got these two guys, if you've got them right on top of each other, you could go in and just, grab this and vert snap it, to sync them all up. That's a little tedious. And, if you have several points that you need to do, if you only have 1 or 2 points, it may not be a big deal. It may be faster for you to do that. But what you could do is take these guys now and create another blend shape between them. And then here on blend shape 4, let's go back to wireframe unshaded. So you see, as I activate this blend shape, I'm changing my original target and it's cleaning up my deformed geometry. So if I take this now back down to 1, you can kind of see here already, this looks a lot cleaner than it did before. And just to show you even more clearly, that's the old target. This is a new one. Now, if we're looking at this, it hasn't really changed all that much, and maybe this was too much of a change for, how far you moved it or whatever. You could back off of that and you could maybe push these up some more or whatever. But the point I'm making is, you're not really changing your shape all that much. So unless you had a very good reason for having this go up so high compared to these guys, then this is going to give you a better deformation overall, especially as your animators keep pulling this shape higher and higher, if they go 3 or 4, 5 times beyond what you thought the max value should be. So once you do that, all you really need to do now is take your target and edit, delete by type, history. So now it doesn't have any of that history on it anymore. And then that new target that I made, this guy, you can just delete him. And that will also delete that blend shape from the base shape onto that second target. So that's one example, and you're wanting to kind of consider the fall off. So you have that epicenter and you have your shape fall off kind of from that epicenter. So some other examples. Here I've got, let's say we're making like a smile shape or a mouth corner up. I've got this target and I've got this base shape, and I've got several targets that I've added to it. They're all pretty much the same, and I did that just to kind of help illustrate the points I'm making. So I've got this target, and at a value of 1, this is how far it goes. Now, before going any further, I would just like to say that typically for mouth corner up, I would not have it stop here. I would actually probably push it to maybe about here or even a little further. I like to make sure that animators have enough distance that even before they get out of what you'd probably call an unsupported range, it'll still look good. And even then, I try to make it still look good past that to at least 1.5 or 2 as best I can. Now, I didn't really do that here because I wanted to kind of maintain this square and have everything stay inside of the square. So here's my 1 value. And so this is just one target pumping in. It's just this guy. And this control, the ABC, are pumping directly into the ABC of the targets. So as you go into the negative, though, you see the down shape kind of falls apart really quickly, and it doesn't look great. So it's pretty obvious that you need another target to kind of help make that down shape look better. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. You could actually make a completely separate target, and then with your control, you could have it to where as it goes into the positive, it, through set driving keys or whatever, drives that target to turn on, and then in the negative, it stops it and turns on the other target. What I've done is I've got these 2 targets here, and this guy is just an in-between of this target set at -1. And I've always had difficulty getting it to work interactively. So what I did was, after I created the target, I used this, used the actual blend shape command, and this is with Python. So you name the blend shape, that's the first argument, so it's blend shape 2, and then true for edit equals true, and IB equals true for in between equals true. And then here's where the magic happens. This guy right here, target equals, and then face, that's this node, that's your base shape. 1 is the index on the blend shape that you're modifying. So in this case, it's 0, 1. And then the target that you want to add in, and the in-between value, so negative 1.0. And that makes it so that then when you have this driving it, here's your positive, and then here's your negative, and it's these two targets. So for this second one, I made that negative target, and I put in a couple of issues that I've seen come up, and these are things I want to kind of give you some tips on. But if you were to just look at this, I know it's not really great, but if you're looking at this, and even if it's three-dimensional, you might just look at the shape in shaded, and you may think, oh, that looks great. It doesn't look bad. It's got a nice arc to it or whatever. But when you look at your geometry, your base shape with the wireframe on, and you're looking at the points as they move, then you'll notice a couple of issues. And most of the time it's just something that you kind of feel. You don't necessarily see, but the first one would be dead points. So points that basically stop as you cross your 0 threshold. So that, in this example, is this row of control points up here. So in the positive, they go up, and then as you go back down to 0, they're going down, and then once you cross that threshold, they stop dead in their tracks. So it kills it. So it's going to make it look dead as you pass that threshold. So like I said, when it's just in shaded mode, you may not necessarily see this or notice it. But if you have wireframe, you'll definitely see it. And if you have a texture, you'll also see it there, where this area starts stretching really bad. And whereas before, as you're crossing that line, you have this nice kind of compression, and it's starting to decompress a little bit, and then you got this nasty stretching right here. So all you really need to do is, for your down shape, is you just need to give it some movement down. And you don't necessarily have to move it super far. Like, you don't really need to move this way down here or anything like that. You could just barely move it if you wanted to. And as long as you give it just that little bit of movement, it's going to help liven it back up and make it feel alive again. So let's say that's great. And I'm just doing this really quickly. You would obviously want to spend a little bit more time on it, but you can kind of see already as it's going up and then coming down, it still feels more alive, because this is moving now up and down all the way through the 1 to -1, or even past, that's -2 to +2. So just much more helpful for livening it up. And then the other one I want to show you is yo-yos. So if we look right here on these two, as I go back down and cross the 0, these vertices start going back upward again. So you have it going up for your upward target, and then they're coming down as you go to the 0, and then you cross that 0 threshold, and they start going up again. So it's kind of like a yo-yo. They just boing, 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 or a bouncing ball, whatever. So that's another thing you want to avoid. And so here's a clean shape. I'm just going to move it over here to my negative target. So you can see here how much higher these are from there's that little bit of movement between the default shape. So if I move it down, you can even move it half of the distance or maybe even less. All we're really looking for is you're trying to get it so that it continues the direction of movement. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Like if it moved 1 unit upward on the up target, you don't have to move it 1 unit down on the down target. You just want to give it some movement, and you can kind of see it slow down a little bit, but it's not terrible, but it just helps to keep that movement alive. So if you ran into a situation where you needed to kind of stop something and have it not go as far, you may still want to give it just a tiny little bit of movement in the opposite direction, just to prevent any yo-yos or stopping, to just give it a little bit of life. Now, again, these are just kind of guidelines. They're not hard and fast rules. You may have a situation where you don't need that. Now, I threw that in here because there's a situation over here that's doing a yo-yo, but it's harder to see because they're moving up as well. So, and it's actually the opposite direction. As we're in the negative, these 2 points down here are kind of going over to the left. They're moving over this way to the left as they're going down. And then as they go up, they cross the 0 line, and then they start going over to the left again. So, and it's one of those things that you just kind of feel. It's hard to actually see it happening, but as you go back and forth over it, you'll kind of feel this popping, and it's hard to put your finger on it sometimes. But that's what's happening here. You got these points going over this way, and then as they go up, they go over again. So when they go up to the 0, they're going back to the 0 and then over this way on the positive. So my C target here is pretty much these 2 targets. I'll just hide this. So it's pretty much the same as these 2 targets, but I just kind of tweaked both of them just a little bit to kind of help show better movement. So one thing I did with these guys that I was just talking about is on the up, they come out this way to the right ever so slightly on the up shape, so that you don't really feel that hiccup there anymore. Now there is a slight hiccup here in the corner, and that's because with this original target, I pushed the corner inward some to kind of help illustrate some of these points I'm making. Typically speaking, when I'm making a mouth corner up and down, I would not work in any side-to-side movement in that. You would leave the corner in-out control for that, so that you have the mouth corner, and then you pull the mouth corner to here and collapse all these edges together, and do the same in the opposite direction. So that way you don't have a case where an animator is like, oh man, it's got this hiccup every time I go from up to down, and I have to pull my in-out control out just a little bit right there to kind of help take care of that, or push it in or whatever. So that's what I would do differently with this, but I'm just trying to help show the idea. And I did a similar thing with this. So as these go up, they kind of push inward, and as they come back down, they push outward just a little bit. So it helps to give it that life back into it. And you can see here, it's not yo-yoing anymore. And there's no dead spots, nothing where it's stopping. Okay, so everything I've just told you would be a guideline. The yo-yos, the dead spots, the fall off with the epicenter, those are guidelines. There may be situations where you actually do disregard that, but this last one I'm going to show you is one that is a hard and fast rule. Do not ever do this. What you want to avoid is sliding your spans around of your primary defining edges. So, for example, this mouth corner would be one. So if let's just select the edges here of the mouth corner, and I've got another target on here where I've created this kind of squished up mouth corner up, and you can see that the span that was going into the corner is now kind of on the bottom lip, just down a little bit. And all of these examples, these are all things I have seen in production, that from models that we've gotten for targets and stuff. And I want to be very careful here. I'm not trying to blame modelers and say they're doing a bad job or whatever, because again, if you're looking at these in shaded without a wireframe and you're not paying attention to where these edges go, it looks phenomenal. It can look beautiful. It doesn't in this case, because this is a very, very simple example to kind of help illustrate the point and make it very clear. But as you go into this one, you can very clearly see that it's shifting and it looks bad. But if you had some in-betweens in here, you could mitigate that and make it not as noticeable, as maybe you have like 3 in-betweens in there when it 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75, so that this expanding here doesn't really happen. But the problem is going to happen where, say you have, on your low res mesh, you have a control for every span of the lip or the eye, that are like tweaker controls. So you may have like a center, A, B, C, and then a corner. So if you get into this pose and the animator says, okay, I need to pull the corner a little bit up or down or in or out or whatever, they're going to say they have a control picker. They'll pick that corner control, and as they move it, it's going to be moving this guy, not this guy. So then they have to go and find which control it is that they're looking for. And it's just, it leads to all kinds of inconsistencies of issues, and it's going to make your animators mad. Now, like I said, I have seen this in production, but it was probably something similar or closer to this, where I had a character that had a very specific smile shape they wanted, where like if you say the character's eye is like right here, they had to have the mouth kind of go up and track back around this way, and the corner of the mouth ended up above the eye. So it was like, here's your eye and here's your mouth corner up here above your eye, and it's this huge smile. So it had to have a lot of spans in there to support that shape. And just for a proof of concept, they had the modeling team create the shape, just to kind of see that if we had enough spans to get up there and all that stuff, so that they could make sure that we got this model right, which was not a bad thing. They did kind of a whole face blend shape target of this smile. So, I mean, it was moving everything from the eyebrows and all that stuff as well, scrunching the nose some. It was a huge target, which was great. And as long as you're using it for just examples and reference, that's what it should be. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was, without our knowledge really, it had been given to the cloth and hair department so that they could do some fur testing to make sure that the fur would stand up to this new stretching before it was even given to me to rig. And then when I got it, they told me, go ahead and try to put this blend shape in. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to extract out, the brows and all this kind of stuff. But as I'm looking at it, I found out that this corner mouth span had shifted down like 4 or 5 spans onto the bottom lip. And that wasn't going to fly for animation, because, if they're pulling the corner expecting this, and it's pulling this spot in the kind of the corner of the mouth on the bottom lip, somewhere around there, between the middle and the corner, it's, they're going to throw that back at me and say, hey, why isn't this working right? So this is the only hard and fast rule. Do not jump those defining spans and shift them around in your targets. So that's pretty much all I want to share with you guys. These are just some tips, aside from that one hard and fast rule. But just to recap, for this idea of 4-dimensional modeling, you're modeling your 3-dimensional spot, XYZ coordinates for where those points end up, but you're also concerned with that 4th dimension of movement and how it gets to that spot from its default position into the new spot over time or as it's moving. So you've got your fall off that you want to be aware of. You've got your want to prevent any yo-yos or dead spots, so that as you're crossing that zero plane, you're not going to have that dead spot or yo-yo happening. All right, so anyway, that's all I have to share with you guys. I hope you find it useful, and have a blessed day.